All right, give it up one more time for St. Cooper Books. All right, let's get started. So I will get us started with a free to land.
Free the land.
Free to land.
Free the land.
Free to land.
Free the land.
By any means necessary. My name is Jomo Muhammad. I'm part of the Malcolm X grassroots movement and very excited and honored to be the moderator for this discussion around the book, Culture, Politics, Spirituality, and Practice with one of the co-founders of MXGM, Baba Akinyela. Ooh, Makungu Akinyela. All right, I just did just a little review. I did a book talk with the other one yesterday, so I need to get here now. And so want to invite folks too in the back. There's 3 seats up in the front. If you folks want a seat, you can come around the side here and fill up the row. But let's get into the book. So the book's 4 themes: culture, politics, spirituality, and practice. They're kind of 4 themes, and on the cover are 4 kind of pictures of you. And as I was reflecting about the principles and the different ways I've experienced you as a preacher, as a political person, as a cultural worker, even in the organization, right, with the 8 bowls of life and even the libation. I began to see some connections. So I would love for you to introduce yourself to the folks through how these 4 themes, culture, politics, spirituality, and practice, have shaped your journey and led you to write this book.
Well, thank you, Jomo. First of all, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm really excited to be here at Sankofa Books. To tell you the truth, we had already set this up, and then after the fascist temperature rose, I got a little nervous about, okay, what are we going to meet here? But overall, I'm really happy to be here. This book really is something that's helped me to pull together all the strands of interest that have shaped me over the years. You know, my primary work identity, for folks who don't know, I'm a therapist. I'm a therapist in private practice. I focus on decolonizing mental health. In fact, I have a second book that'll be coming out from Norton Publications in May called Testimony Therapy, Decolonizing Mental Health for Black Therapists and Clients. So it's all about clinical. This book has mental health woven throughout it. You talk about the 4 pictures that are there. There was first of all a fight. My wife forced me to put those pictures on there. The publisher wanted to do it. I said, hell no. Then my wife said, yeah, you got to do it. And so we had this big argument and fight. But those do cover periods of my life as I developed into the person that I am today. If you look at that first picture, I was about 16 years old, which is when I first consciously, purposely got involved in political movement. I think my first act of defiance was to go to a Free Huey rally in Expedition Park in Los Angeles, California, where I grew up, against my parents' wishes. They did not want me there. I walked out the house and I showed up there, and I kept doing stuff like that from then on. So that's about 16. The second picture you see is me probably at the height of being a cultural worker. I was organizing and working with a group called Griot. I first worked with a group called Prophecy in Black, a musical group and spoken word group. And then I met probably my best creative partner, a sister named Mbali Umoja, who was a dynamic poet from Long Beach, California. And we traveled up and down California doing organizing work through spoken word, through poetry. That particular picture is from the campus of Northridge University at Northridge, right, in Los Angeles, which was it's arguably the second school to have an uprising and establish a Black Studies department after San Francisco State. That particular place, we were organizing to force the school to defund from its investments in South Africa, and doing poetry work there. The second is my political work. as I was organizing for the New African Peoples Organization. That's shortly after the founding of the New African Peoples Organization, which is my central political work and political organizing work. And then the third is probably about maybe about 15, almost 20 years ago. I was only about 50 there. I'm 71 now, right? And at the height of my work as both a therapist and also, as you said, I'm an elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which I talk about some in this book. And so all those issues, culture, politics, spirituality, and practice have been a part of shaping me where I am. And this particular book talks about all those different ideas and issues in the world, and it weaves the question of mental health and the tying question, because the subtitle of this book, A Book of Resistance and Critical Theory for Troubling Times. It asks the question, how do we deal with these questions and these issues in the face of rising fascism, right? So that's kind of the back part. And I guess you asked where the book came from. This was a book that came actually with the encouragement of some comrades and some colleagues of mine. I'd spent a year almost teaching an online study group on France Fanon. France Fanon is really important to my mental health work. I focus on Fanon as a mental health worker, as a therapist, and I was leading a group of people. There was people from Rwanda, from Australia, and Canada primarily, and we went through all of Fanon's books, talking about his books, and to wind that study up, it was decided that we would all go to Martinique to try to actually find Fanon. Martinique is the island that Fanon was born on, and we went to Martinique. We had conversations, we had discussions, we found people to talk to and interview while we were there that were connected to Fanon in some kind of a way. And particularly one night we were there and we had just watched online the memorial service for Dr. Mutulu Shakur. And we were talking about New African politics and the independence movement. And as we were talking about all these things, the people who were in that group began to encourage me that I needed to put these ideas in a book itself. And the publisher, who is the director of the Dulwich Center in Adelaide, Australia, who they publish a lot of books on mental health, but they said, we'll publish that book for you. And they began to show me how we could tie all these different things together and string them with these dialogues that are throughout the book, conversations after each section, and string them together. And so we started that in 2023. It took about 2 years for the final book to come to production, and we just the book came out in March of this year. So that's it.
All right. That's a beautiful story. And I kind of remember hearing that. I was like, wow, radical psychiatrists in the land of Fanon, studying and writing on Fanon. And there's a way that even in that, there's this way that land kind of begins to play a role, even when we'll talk a little bit about Ghana and that role there. But can you talk a little? Well, I'm gonna get into that. We'll come back to that because I have some questions planned. But I think that's an important thing, kind of the centrality of land, space, and what you later call kind of these pockets of freedom, which feels like that's what you experienced there and then in Ghana. The book opens. The first section is decolonizing our lives, divining a post-colonial therapy, where you write rather prophetically to this moment, quote, "It is rare to get far into a conversation without some acknowledgement of today's craziness or new terrifying development coming out of Washington, D.C." What week are we into the surge now? And here we are. We are in the midst of a terrifying development, the occupation or the intensifying of the occupation of D.C., with this looming threat that what we see happening in D.C. would parallels what we've seen happen in Palestine is now being then exported to other black cities, right? And so if you could talk about what is post-colonial therapy and how it could be useful for everyday people, and in particular, those who are leading resistance.
That particular chapter, which is one of the first pieces that I began to write about decolonizing mental health, and I wrote it, it was almost 25 years ago when I originally wrote it. And when I first wrote it at that time, it was published, and one of my mentors, a sister named Nancy Boyd Franklin, who was probably she's the foremost black family therapist. I started reading her books right out of school, and then I met her, and she became a mentor to me. And she challenged me. She told me, first of all, why are you talking about post-colonialism using white people's timeline, right? That keeps us tied up in the colonial contradiction, talking about post-colonialism as if somehow the oppression of our people has stopped. So actually, I don't use that term, but the problem with textuality in literature is once you write some. I can't.
Yeah, go ahead. Go be yourself. Go ahead, be yourself. This is a cursing ass preacher. I'll beat you to it.
I mean, once you write some shit down, sometimes it's stuck, right? But the truth is, the primary contradiction in the world today is colonization and decolonization, right? So I would talk more about I talk today about decolonizing mental health, right? But the whole point of that piece is that the problems that impact our people today, right? And this is Fanon's influence on me. Even when there are biologically or medically based problems that might bring us, say, depression or anxiety, if there are, Fanon argued that there are always sociogenic issues. In other words, social issues that exacerbate that problem. So you might be depressed, right? And yes, maybe it's a brain thing, like they try to sell us those drugs, right? But guess what? There's stuff happening in the world today that's depressing. There's a reality that's depressing. You might be anxious, and yes, there might be some lesions in the brain, which is what the kind of things that Fanon kind of worked on, looking if there are lesions that might be causing your mental health problems. But these are anxious times. These are troubling times. There are real issues, and when you are an oppressed person, when you are a colonized person, an African or an Asian or a Latinx person who's living under the yoke of colonialism and capitalism, it can make you crazy. And so the point of that article is that particularly those of us who are mental health workers, talking to our people in the street, in the community, we have to even begin decolonizing the way we deal with the question of mental health. When I was trained as a therapist, the basic idea of Western therapy is that society is actually close to perfect. And usually it's people who don't know how to fit in well, right? And so our work as mental health workers is to help people figure out how to fit into society. We're never trained to ask the question, what if the society is fucked up, right? And if it is, how do we talk to the people about their experience within the society, right? And help them find a way back to health. Now, again, in my training, the solution to that was to help people properly individuate. The ultimate Western response, help them to be an individual. But what if the culture you come from is primarily a culture that is grounded in community, that is grounded in communitarian ideas, that even the way you think, for the most part, is the collective. In my new book, I talk about the collective self amongst black people. Y'all know how we always talk about we, right? It's like if somebody do something good, we say, man, we showed this show out, didn't we? You know, when that sister cussed that white girl out the other day on the tennis court, we was proud because you don't mess with us like that, right? We think in the collective term. On the other hand, if somebody do something bad, do y'all remember, and I write this in my upcoming book, y'all remember when the brother Muhammad was going around shooting people
Oh,
up
yeah.
here.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Before we knew who it was, we knew it was some crazy white man because only white people do stuff like that. But the minute they put that brother's picture on TV, we said, oh, squat.
Yeah. Yeah.
We going to be in trouble now.
Yeah.
They're going to be looking at all of us. How do you deal with people whose very way of thinking about their reality is collective and communitarian, right? Maybe it's more harmful trying to get those people to individuate, and maybe it's more helpful to find people to find healthy ways back to community, right? But also what that means is, if that were true, it puts us into constant contradiction with the capitalist, vulgar individualist society that they're trying to fit us into. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. A little bit of follow-up question. Why use the word divining a post-decolonial therapy?
Sometimes it ain't right in front of you. Sometimes you have to divine. You know, it's a spiritual term. It's a term. It's a cultural term, right? Sometimes our people have to divine a situation. Sometimes we just got to sit up and meditate on that thing or think about that thing. But you know, my wife is looking for the book, and whoever runs the bookstore, I hope y'all do have The Souls of Black Folk, right? And I think about, in Du Bois's book, Souls of Black Folk, when he talks about double consciousness, he says the Negro is sort of a second son born with a veil, right? And when Du Bois was talking about that, he was dipping into Black mythology. He was dipping into Black cultural understanding, the idea of the seventh child born with a veil, born with sometimes we call it a caul, born with the mother's afterbirth over its face. And he says, because of that, Black people have a special second sight. We have a special understanding of what's happening in America that the colonizer can't have, right? Even when it doesn't mean that we are deeply political or whatever, but our existence in this country, in the way that we have been put in this space, we are able to divine certain situations. And so we're constantly divining, trying to figure out, trying to understand the direction that we should go. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And that it always, when I'm reading it, it can apparently feel like a contradiction, like psychiatry being a man of science, then divining.
Well, that's one of the contradictions, is that, you know, again, capitalism can mess you up, right? One of the problems with mental health today is that insurance companies have gotten control of mental health, for instance, right? And the only way a person is supposed to be able to get paid to do this work is if you only use what they call evidence-based, research-proven methods of work, which means things that have been tested primarily on white men, right, in the context of white culture, right? And so if you say that you've used those, they will pay you. On the other hand, you know, if you use things that might be more relevant to the culture, the ways of understanding, the ways of living of African people, which sometimes might be using things which don't look so scientific, right? So, for instance, one of the things I talk about is externalizing conversations. You're talking to a brother or a sister, and they talk about their depression, and you might start saying, "So, wow, how long has depression been trying to fool you into staying in the bed all day long?" And when depression tries to fool you into do that, are there any times when you've been able to fight back against depression and kick depression's butt and get up? Now, that's a conversation. It's called externalizing the problem, right? Now, Black folks, that it didn't take a psychologist or a therapist. Black folks been talking about demons for a long time, right? You know, particularly, them church folk, you got a spirit of lust on you, right? That we externalize, right? And I don't have to believe in demons, but it's a culturally appropriate way to help us say, you're not the problem. The problem is the problem. The problem is depression. The problem is not you. The problem is rage or anger. The problem is not you. And right at this point, this problem might be influencing you and troubling you, right? Once again, Fanon made that observation when he was studying in Algeria. And he made the observation that people in the West talk about science. And so they say, you know, you've got a mental illness. But have you ever noticed that even when we know that a brother or sister has a mental illness that they're struggling with, we get pissed at them when they don't act like they got some sense. We get mad at them. We cuss them out. We say, you can do better than that. You're just doing that on purpose. What Fanon noticed that in Algeria, amongst the North Africans, you know, a mother might have a son who is acting in ways that we would call schizophrenic. Mm-hmm. And the son might cuss the mother out or even hit the mother. And she'll say, that's just the jinn messing with you. In other words, that's the demons. That's not you. My son wouldn't do that. And I understand it's the jinn, right? And so it did take some old dead white man with a theory to understand that the power of externalizing a problem, right? And we can do those things. Now, on the other hand, if you describe it that way, you might not get paid by the insurance company because the insurance company, right, has colonized mental health, right, and said that only these practices grounded in these Western cognitive behavioral ideas are legitimate at any time for money. Does that make sense?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So then, in part 2 of the book, you introduce us to Ghanaian historian James Amesamor.
Amemasor. Yes.
Which is about acknowledging our ancestors and healing our lives. It's just for like every section is just some wisdom there, right? Like, but will you? And then later you include a speech that you gave on his behalf. So could you talk a little bit about who he is, how you met him, and why you thought it was critical to include his voice in the book?
Yeah. James is a really important person. James now is actually a professor of history at Rutgers University. When I met him, he was a 24-year-old man who was a tour guide at Cape Coast Castle in Ghana. He was, and it's when I took my very first trip to Africa, and went on the tour of Cape Coast, the slave dungeons, and you know, immediately clicked into James, and he was taking us around, and he was touring us with these things, and he had a lot of, you know, he knew how to talk to black folks from the United States, right? He understood the significance of taking this tour. And, you know, one of the most powerful things is that James took us throughout. He took us down into the belly of the dungeons, and he showed us these spaces where, you know, men and women were kept in a room maybe half the size of this space, sometimes hundreds of people for weeks and weeks and weeks after traveling for miles and miles and miles to the coast, right? Basically suffer, you know, hunger, torture, rape, right? And he took us through there. He told the story in ways that forced us to live that experience and to relive that experience. And finally, he took us to the space, and there's a space, and I think Cape Coast is where the movie Sankofa was filmed, I believe, if it wasn't Elmina. But there's a space right there, and it's called the Door of No Return. It's the door that our ancestors went through, right, as they were being sent out to those ships to be brought to the Western world. And he had been telling this story, and you know, if you got any heart, right, you're sitting there and you're like, man. And James, he took us to that door, and he invited me to step through the door of no return, like our ancestors did. And for me, that was a very powerful thing. But what was even more powerful, he asked me to turn around once I'd stepped through the door. I was looking out over the Atlantic Ocean, right, imagining those ships out there. And he asked me to turn around. And I looked up, and over the door said the door of return. And he asked me to walk through. And when I walked through that door, James said, "Welcome home." That was the most powerful thing that I had ever experienced, right? Even today, like I kind of choke when I think about that thing of being welcomed home by a brother, right? And from that moment, James and I became very close. He was a student of history, and he wanted to continue his study, and we stayed in contact. And to the point that we basically started a campaign and raised money so that James could get here and continue his educational studies. So he got his PhD to become, now he's a professor at Rutgers, as I said, right? But when we left, we had actually been on that trip to Ghana to prepare for a conference, an international conference that I organized in Atlanta, Georgia. We organized at Spelman. It was the first international narrative therapy and community work conference to be held inside the United States. It's been held all over the world. It comes from Australia. And it's narrative therapists. Narrative therapy is a therapy that assumes that the way we constitute our lives, the way we think about our lives as human beings, is through storytelling. So therapists from all over the world were going to be coming, and I, along with two sisters, Vanessa Mahmood and Vanessa Jackson, organized the conference, and we held it on Spelman's campus. And we wanted to really focus on ancestry for that conference. So, for instance, we couldn't hold that conference without having the people who were the people of the land, the First Nations people from that land, did a welcoming ceremony and acknowledging that the land belonged to them. We poured libation to recognize our African ancestors who died on that southern land down in Georgia. We constantly recognized the importance of ancestors, and we intended to have James come and speak about his knowledge about the enslavement of our people from that side of the water. They wouldn't give him the visa. And so what we did is he wrote the speech. I did a keynote at the conference, and then I ended my keynote with giving his talk for him. And that's what's in the book, talking about the power and the importance of ancestry and the power of our ancestors.
Yeah, just such a beautiful story, right? I was there on the ledge with you, right, staring out and wondering what's next, and to visualize the turnaround, to see the welcome back, right? And for me, I was like, oh, this is a real way that ancestry and history can help heal our folks. And then that's that second reference to kind of land and space. And I'm curious if you have any reflections on kind of the way land has played a little bit of role in shaping.
As I said, particularly for us, and this came up at the conference, right? You know, the fact that, you know, our people are in that land in the South, right? Our people, some of them never left the continent. They're in that land, right? Our people are in the ocean, right? But we've always, a part of our identity has been the connection to the land, right? I think in the book, I tell the story, a clinical story again, of a young woman who's in mourning because her child died soon after birth. And she was in mourning about that. And so one of the things that we do in a therapy session is I ask her if she's ever acknowledged her child as an ancestor, right? If she's ever acknowledged that this was a person, this was a human being who had significance in the world. And so in the therapy session, what we did is we designed a ritual, which would include libation. And we went outside. We didn't stay in the office. We went outside and we found a tree. And we did that ritual and recognized that child, and we poured libation, and she reintroduced herself to her child, right? As she poured that libation, she let that child know that she was the mother, right? And for her, that was a very significant thing. And then she took that experience, she took that ritual, and she took it back home, and she did it with her partner. And they did it together to recognize that child as, yes, the baby died, but the child lived on as an ancestor. So the child was still connected to her and connected through that recognition of making the libation into the land. And so again, when I write that note up, I won't get paid for it because the insurance companies don't recognize that, because capitalism can't control people's culture, right? Yeah, but that's what we do.
Yeah, our people are in the land. That just that just hits with the heart. A little bit gotta have my set of questions, but then because you started talking about ancestors, and when I was reviewing the book, I had a chuckle when you were talking about libation. And you have a line, you say, ancestorship isn't guaranteed.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about what you mean by that?
And one of the things is, as we begin to define our national consciousness and our national culture, I think I'm having a conversation with David Denbrough, who is the editor and the publisher for the book. And we're talking about ancestry. And one of the things that I say to him is that just being dead don't make you an ancestor, right? Because also, in the best of African tradition, our generational, our age, and our family connections is actually about creating an order of ethics in the world, an ethical order. And so in the best of our African traditions, right, in Mississippi where I was born and back in Ghana, right, in the best of our African traditions, we have ethical relationships. So old people take care of babies because they know those babies just came from where the old people about to go, right? Young people respect their elders and give respect to those elders because they also want to be treated well by those babies that, when they get to be elders, right? Elders, right, when they pass, right, want to be respected as ancestors. And ultimately, I think it's grounded in what the Yoruba called Iwapele. Iwapele is good character. It's what my grandmama called being a good Christian, right? Just being a good person, right? And our whole purpose in life is to learn to be a good person, to have ethical relationships, right? And so just because you die, if you die and you're an asshole.
All right, you got your first testimony out there. Let the church say ashe.
You just, but I want my children to remember my name, right? My mama passed away a couple of months ago, right? And she had, as she was dying, she had all of her grandchildren and great-grandchildren around her, right? All of them. I mean, they came from all over the country. Why the hell would they do that?
Right.
Because she was a good person, right? And when she got there, she challenged them. She could hardly hold her head up, right? She was sinking fast, right? And my daughter, who is kind of the head of what they call the cousins, she looked at her and she says, Shimaranga. My daughter's name is Shimaranga. It means revolution.
Okay.
Right? She says, Shimaranga, how y'all gonna keep me alive? I said, oh, shit. That's a hell of a question to ask a young person. She said, how y'all gonna keep me alive? At first I'm thinking, my mama saying she don't want to die. Right? But then I thought, no, that's not what she's saying. And my daughter and the other young people, they says, we gonna do what you taught us how to do. That was their response, right? And that's So my mother was able to go into ancestry because she was assured that her grandchildren and her children and her great-grandchildren would keep her alive. I want my children to remember my name, to call my name, to pour libation for me, and recognize that just because I'm dead, I'm still alive. Right? I'm still here. My memory is here, my lessons, my grandchildren and my children still remember the lessons that my mama taught. My daughter makes the best sweet potato pie ever and collard greens, right? And she learned it from my mama. Right? She knows how to behave and to act because my mama taught it to her. When we are ancestors, we leave lessons, which means we still live, right? That and it's grounded in an ethic of relationship, right? I think that's a lesson for us as we try to build a revolutionary and democratic society. We have to build society that's grounded in an ethic of relationship. And teaching folk, revolution is about teaching folk how to be good people, so you don't be trying to exploit people and mess over people, right? And so having an idea that just being dead is not good enough, so our reason to live is to be a good person, to have iwa pele, to build good relationships around us, right? So that the good we left will be remembered.
Ashe. Ashe. All right. That's right. So then part 3, that's my favorite part because it gets spicy. And in knowing you've always struck me as a very powerful dialectical materialist, right? Being able to unify the opposites. I just remember so many meetings, you drilling that into our heads. And so part 3 is titled Thinking Critically About the Culture, and where you present a critique of Afrocentricity that I feel like is important to understanding Black politics in this current moment and what folks have started to name the Black misleadership class. And where you're from, Atlanta, an example of that has been the Black mayor and the predominantly city council that supported the creation of Cop City. And most recently here, the Mayor Muriel Bowers, because she was bowing to Trump just the other day, and acknowledging that though the city had a low crime rate, that somehow this invasion has lowered the crime rate. And so can you talk about what that critique is of Afrocentricity and how it applies to also our politics?
This almost got me blackballed in the Black academia for a minute. Whiteballed.
That's right. Keep us on path.
And I don't think of myself as a dialectical materialist. I came of age through a society called the House of Umoja, and we talked about Black dialectics, right?
Yeah.
I think there's some critiques. I'm not opposed to Marxist dialectical materialism, but there's some legitimate critiques that we Africans have, right? But I think that a dialectical analysis is necessary. A class analysis of our current condition is necessary, right? In the context of colonialism, right? And in this particular piece, the chapter called Rethinking Afrocentricity, I do a particular critique of the Afrocentricity of Molefi Asante and Maulana Karenga in particular. Asante is the person who coined Afrocentricity. And a part of that critique is that what we call Eurocentricity is a historical reality. It's not an eternal reality. In other words, white folks ain't always been as crazy as we see today, right? What we call Eurocentricity is the result of the historical process of modernization from 1492 to the present, the development of capitalism, the emergence of a mercantile and a capitalist class who wanted to have some authority outside of the church so they couldn't be controlled. And so they looked back to what they called classical Greek culture, right? And, they said Greek aesthetic, Greek philosophy, Greek mathematics. They claim that the Greeks created everything, right? As they also developed whiteness to declare that black people didn't do nothing. And so Eurocentrism is the philosophy of the white people who won. All white people didn't always think like that. There were white people that thought much more closely to African thought and whatnot. But Eurocentrism is the philosophy of the white people who won that results in capitalism and colonialism. The critique I make is that when it's not careful, Afrocentric thought can basically replicate that same thought and process, oftentimes flipping it over, painting it black, and calling it Afrocentric, but basically saying the same thing. If white people got a classical culture, we got to have a classical culture. Our classical culture is what? Kemet. Now, I have no problems with Kemet. I love Kemetic thought. Hotel. Right? At the same time, it becomes problematic. For instance, in the book, I quote Asante, who makes an argument that black people have never had any class contradictions, right? That, we don't believe in that kind of contradictory life. That's some white people stuff. But then I quote Sheikh Anta Diop, who is one of the mentors of Molefi Asante. And Diop talks about the Sixth Dynasty, right? And under King Zoser, where the ruling class basically took control of all the land, gave themselves special privileges. And as they gave themselves special privileges, it also said that the Pharaoh was the only one who could have what they called the Osirian death. The Pharaoh was the only one who could die and actually see eternity. But because of that class conflict of that ruling class over the peasantry, over the workers in Kemet, the poor and the workers rose up and rebelled against that, and it had such a reverberating effect on Kemet that they even changed the theology. Now, all of a sudden, everybody could go to heaven, right? Because of that revolutionary challenge to taking the land from the people. And again, that's not me saying that. That's Sheikh Anta Diop saying that there was a class conflict 4,000 years ago in Egypt, right? Which means that with all the ma'at in the world, there was times when black people had class contradictions, had social contradictions, understanding that it's those kinds of contradictions that make history. That's what moves things along, right? It's not a European thing, it's a human thing that happens. But unfortunately, because of that, relying on that basically bourgeois Eurocentric analysis, right? What often happens then also is that Afrocentrism fails to look at the contradictions of capitalism itself. And oftentimes, if you just let us be black and let us fit into the corporation, if you just let us be black and, let us have our jobs, let us have our space, the primary contradiction of oppression in the world today is colonization and decolonization spurred on by capitalist development over 500 years. And until we do that, we are never going to be free, until we see that contradiction and challenge that contradiction. Now, the difference where I have with my Marxist brothers and sisters, right, is that it's a colonial contradiction, which means it's a cultural contradiction. And that a part of the resistance to colonization is us as we develop our consciousness as a nation, as a people. That's the cultural struggle. As we develop our consciousness as black people, I believe that as we deal with these struggles today, we're seeing more and more the consciousness, the national consciousness of our people develop. One of the things that I talk about in the book is that even under this oppression, more and more y'all notice black people are grasping onto our cultural stuff. Black people are practicing black history and more intensely than they ever did, right? A few years ago, people had never heard of Juneteenth, right? Now everybody want to practice Juneteenth.
Right.
When the demonstrations were happening under COVID and thousands of people were getting in the street, for me, what was significant that as black people began to get in the street, for the first time, we began to see hundreds and hundreds of red, black, and green flags popping up. Now, people ain't going around talking about we are a nation necessarily, but there is a national consciousness developing. It's up to revolutionaries to promote and push that national consciousness, right? But it's happening because this is the process of what Fanon would call decolonization. And Fanon says that decolonization is a violent process. It's happening whether we like it or not, right? The problem is, are those of us who are seeking real freedom for our people ready and prepared to take advantage of the historical moment? Mm-hmm. That was a lot.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Just well, one, y'all heard it from Baba. Black folk invented class struggle. 40,000 years ago in Egypt, that was 4, us. 4,000 years ago, that was us. We put that on a T-shirt. But in talking about culture, you echo Amilcar Cabral, another kind of theorist around culture, and in the book you describe culture as our heartbeat, as a shield, as a weapon. So could you talk a little bit about how do we as revolutionaries, people who want to wage resistance, really begin to use our culture in a way that it is a shield and a weapon for our freedom?
I want to first, that particular chapter was originally in a book edited by my good brother Bill Fletcher, who's back there, on Amilcar Cabral. But I think it was important to look at Cabral because I think Cabral had a big influence, as I say in that chapter, on the development of revolutionary nationalist theory inside the United States. The title that culture, about culture being a weapon, it's the idea started, and I think I tell the story in that chapter. Years ago in the 80s, I had a meeting with Afeni Shakur, Tupac's mom. Tupac was a little dude at the time, right? When they were living in Oakland, and I didn't know at that time Afeni was probably in the middle of her addiction, and I think most people know that Afeni struggled with crack addiction for a period. But as we were talking, Afeni said something that struck me and it stayed with me. Right. You know, she says that this is the first time in our people's history when we don't have a song, right? And she said, this is like the 80s, right? A lot of her comrades were dead, right? If they wasn't dead, they was either strung out on alcohol or drugs like she was. A lot more of them was in jail, political prisoners, right? Had been languishing in jail. The movement back like the early 80s, and it was at a low. You know, we had just gone through a heavy time after the expropriation of the Brinks truck in Nyack, New York. Mm-hmm. And the New African Independence movement, the Revolutionary Nationalist movement, had been under constant attack. We had been scattered all over. And she says, this is the first time we don't have a song. She said, back in the 50s, you know, we were singing. We were doing poetry. There was always culture that accompanied the struggle. In the 60s, it was like that. Even in the 70s, there was music, there was culture that accompanied the struggle. And this is the first time we don't have it. And there's a lot of truth in that, right? And that particular piece on Cabral becomes important because, again, it was a critique of some of the mistakes that we have made over the decades, right? You had my cultural nationalist brothers and sisters who argued that before you can have a political revolution, you got to have a cultural revolution first. We got to rescue and reconstruct the minds of our people and teach them to be African. I don't think we got to teach Africans how to be African, right? We are African, right? On the other hand, you had like the Black Panther Party of for self-defense, Huey P. Newton's Black Panther Party, which was the last of them. There were other Black Panther parties, but you had Huey and them saying, that the most important thing is political revolution, and anybody talking about culture is pork chop nationalist, right? And so what you had was a dichotomous splitting, right? On the other hand, Cabral and Fanon understood that culture and politics is a dialectical relationship. It's a dialectical process that as you build revolution, that creates culture, because culture comes out of the contradictions amongst the people and between the people and their oppressors, right? That as you build culture, the culture that you're building in struggle influences and gives direction to revolution, right? So culture becomes an important thing for us to pay attention to, right? That we should be producing culture that inspires revolution. That doesn't mean that it's all got to be positive, that it's all got to be something that valorizes or glorifies black people or whatever. The culture should be a critical culture. It should challenge us in our weaknesses and our mistakes, but also it should acknowledge our ongoing struggles of resistance and our victories at the same time. And as we use culture to build revolution, the revolution itself would also build a culture. But there has to be first a philosophy that understands the dialectic between so-called politics and so-called culture. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. I told y'all that was juicy. All right. So then education is freedom highlights that after the demand for land, education is the second demand coming out. And I thought I saw Mama Nkichi in here, and I feel like when there was a reparations survey that they did, I feel like land and education too was one of the kind of top two or top three things that black folks were demanding even to this day. And so you lay out then in the book what you're terming African-centered critical pedagogy. Can you talk about what are some of its principles and practices kind of then and now? And
that chapter comes out. I teach a class at Georgia State called Critical Pedagogy and African American Education. And and the whole purpose of that class, it's a graduate class for students who see themselves going into education. And it becomes important because I was trained in critical pedagogy, particularly focusing on the Brazilian educator Paulo Freire, and who his best known book is The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Freire was brilliant. I was trained by one of Freire's students, Antonia Darder, a Puerto Rican woman who studied with Freire, and but the problem of colonization is, for black students, for black people, again, we often think that the only theory comes from folk who are not us. And so in that class, it becomes important to show that there's actually a parallel between the development of Freire's critical pedagogy and the liberatory education developed by black people over the years. So, for instance, at the same time that that Paulo Freire was writing about and developing his critical pedagogy practices in Brazil, Ella Baker and Septima Clark were down in Alabama and Carolina teaching, right, black people in the citizenship schools and preparing them to learn how to register to vote. And they were using some of the same kinds of concepts, right? One of the important parts of critical pedagogy is to destroy the hierarchy between teacher and student, right? Freire says that the relationship should be, I'm a teacher, student, or I'm a student first, and you as the student are the teacher, because I need to first learn from you. And then after I learn from you, I can be the teacher, and you can be the student, and I'm going to be teaching you what you taught me. So there's an a relationship of equalness. In the citizenship schools, there's a story where a sister and I'm blanking on her name, but she goes into the class for the first time. She's been asked to teach, and she's never taught before. And she walks into the class and she says, "They say I'm your teacher, but you're gonna teach me something, and I'm gonna teach you something, and we're gonna learn together." That was the philosophy of the citizenship schools. They took lay people who, some of them only had a 6th, 7th, 8th grade education themselves, but they knew more than a lot of other people. And they taught them how to go into the communities, not as people who are imposing ideas on people, who go in to organize the people, to first learn from the people. What do you want to learn? And why do you want to learn it? Well, I want to vote. Well, what you got to do to vote? Well, they say you got to be able to read and interpret the Constitution. All right, well, we're going to look at the Constitution then. And we're going to talk about that thing. Well, I want to be able to cipher so I can make sure these crackers are paying me right. You know? Okay, we're gonna learn that. You go to the people and you teach what the people need for the needs of the people, but you don't go from a place of, like a lot of our teachers told us, I got mine. Y'all know that, right? Now it's up to you to get yours. No, this is a place of equality. These are the same principles, basically. They're not using the words that Paulo Freire taught, right? We also, in that class, we read some of the works of Antonio Gramsci. Now, Antonio Gramsci is this Italian communist who was arrested by the Italian fascists when he was in his 20s. He died in jail, but he wrote a lot of great letters, and there's a whole collection of his prison letters. And in those prison letters, he talks about this idea of hegemony. Hegemony is the gained consent of the oppressed to be oppressed, right? In other words, what Gramsci understood and what he realized, because the mystery was, damn, it's 1920-something. The Russians had a revolution like a decade ago, right? And Marx said that the revolution was going to start in the industrial countries in Germany and England, and ass backward, Russia had a revolution, and Germany and England ain't did shit yet, right? And so the mystery is, damn, why did that happen? Right. And so Gramsci says it happened because capitalism has learned to transform itself, and it no longer depends on the boot and the iron fist to keep the workers oppressed. It relies on hegemony. It's gained the consent of the workers to be oppressed by using the cultural institutions, the church, the school, the club, and to tell them if you're poor, you're supposed to be poor because you're not smart enough to be rich. And the workers on some level have accepted that. And that's why the Western countries ain't no revolutions happening. Now, this is what Gramsci said. You know who else said that? A man named Carter G. Woodson. In his book, The Miseducation of the Negro, he says, if you keep telling a man, go round to the back door, go round to the back door, go round to the back door, at some point, even if there is no back door, he'll make one. Because he thinks that's where he's supposed to be. It's the same concept, hegemony. He ain't using it, but he's using the same concept. And you know, he's writing about the same time as Gramsci's writing. Right. You know, I think in philosophy, that's called a zeitgeist, a spirit of the times. Right? So there was something in the air that was making oppressed people and people who were struggling understand concepts and come up with concepts. Now, that's important in my class because even though I want my students to understand critical pedagogy, I don't want them to understand it from a colonial perspective that they've always got to go to somebody other than black people to gain knowledge, to gain understanding, right? But what that also means, you talk about the principles of African-centered critical theory or critical pedagogy, is that we don't shut out knowledge from other sources, right? Yeah, we can borrow that. We can understand that. That's how culture works. We've always borrowed culture, just like folks have borrowed our culture. We've borrowed ideas like people have borrowed our ideas. But again, culture is a dialectical process, and it works even in education. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for that. I really resonate with the idea of being able to really turn to our folks and see ourselves and see how we have been a part of kind of world revolution, and contributors are not always fully acknowledged in that part. So then the last part, part 5 of the book, looks at Black religion, resistance, and what you term revolutionary spirituality. And oftentimes, in my experience as a community organizer, there's been a lot of ways that spirit and politics have been stripped from one another, held separate, seen as conflicting with one another. And so, could you talk about what is the relationship between our spirit, politics, and what you're calling generating revolutionary spirituality?
Yeah. I'm a spiritual person. I'm a person who practices a religion. I'm a Christian, right? I'm an ordained elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. My best friend, I got 2 best friends. One is a priest of New African Vodun, or Ifa. The other is a Muslim, right? And you kind of a friend too. You kind of a Muslim.
That's right. Only right? On Fridays in Ramadan.
Right? Now, for me, that becomes important. I think about the rebellion of Denmark Vesey, right? And for me, that's our best example of an African resistance movement, right? Which utilizes all that our people have. Now, Denmark Vesey, like me, was an African Methodist. He taught Bible study at in Charleston at not Mother Bethel. Emmanuel. Thank you, Mother Emmanuel. See, some educated people's in here. at Mother Emmanuel, which is why that little white boy shot up my brothers and sisters, at Mother Emmanuel on the anniversary of the Vesey Rebellion. Right? But Denmark Vesey had a homeboy, Gullah Jack. Right? Gullah Jack was a hoodoo man. Right? And the way they divided is Vesey organized the AMEs, Gullah Jack organized the Gullahs and the Geechees and the folk that followed hoodoo. Right? You had other segments that from the movement that were organized by other leaders, right? In a national democratic revolution, which I'm praying with all my strength that we will be able to move to. We ain't got time to be sitting up in our horses about who God is the prettiest God, right? That's the first part of it, right? Or if you ain't got God, there's something wrong with you, right? Because God don't really care about all that. But we don't have time to be, because we've got work to do, right? It's the same issues beyond even spirituality, right? People who want to determine what certain people can be a part of our revolution, be a part of our struggle for freedom. And so if your sexuality or your gender don't fit my view of what it should look like, you're not really a legitimate part of this, right? We would argue that we're struggling for the freedom of all the people, for the freedom of all of our people, right? And it becomes a part of the oppressive mechanism when we generate the same kind of oppressive attitudes within our people that our oppressor generates on our people, right? And so I believe that just like, when Afeni said that this is the first time when we didn't have a song, for me, having that song is a part of our spirituality, right? Having a safe space where your spirit, your mind, your soul can go to at moments. We need some relief sometimes from the constant hectic oppression that we face, right? Whether that's, as folks say, in your prayer closet, or in your meditation time, or in your singing, or in your dancing, or whatever it is, we need to accept and legitimize that. I'm old enough to remember a time when there were brothers and sisters. We had debates in Revolution, right? That if people were religious, that they couldn't be a part of the movement, right? People who did see themselves as dialectical materialists, right? In other words, if I can't touch it, feel it, or hear it, it ain't real, right? And sometimes, again, that leaves you in that space all by yourself, and then all you can rely on sometimes is a crack pipe or a bottle or whatever, right? I believe that spirituality can be a powerful and a useful piece, and but again, it has to be a spirituality which, like everything else, should be open up to critique. That does not support colonization, does not support exploitation. In the book, I talk about my own beliefs, for instance, and I say my personal theology and spirituality is based on a belief that the entire Bible, when read from the bottom up and not the top down, is anti-imperialist. From the story of the Tower of Babel, which was about the crumbling down of an attempt to build an empire, to the Hebrew resistance to the enslavement in Kemet, Egypt, which was an empire of that time, to the struggle of Jewish people during the Babylonian Empire, to the descriptions of the Roman Empire, and all the work of Jesus. To me, the entire spectrum of the Bible is anti-imperialist. I believe that God has always been against empire. So for me, when I ask, in this moment, what would the Creator call us to be doing if we're being faithful to our religious tradition? It evokes for me an anti-imperialist God, a God who will stand with us as we resist empire and domination. So just trying to, that's me, right? I think, again, quoting Fanon, right? He says, each generation out of relative obscurity must discover its mission and either fulfill it or betray it. And that works in all these areas too, right? This is no time for a theological revolution, right? Where we're trying to make everybody fit into one pot, right? This is a time for allowing flowers to bloom, but encouraging people to find their spiritual space that'll give them strength to resist this fascism that we're facing on a day-to-day basis.
Ashe, may it be so. All right, that was the set of questions. We want to now reverse the polarity and open it up and learn and hear from the audience questions, reflections, and comments. And we already see we got our first hand. All right.
I don't know if the brother realizes who I am, but if
how you doing?
you do realize who I am.
Yes.
Okay, Soul Book.
This is the brother of my first mentor.
Yeah, Soul Book. House of Emotion.
I worked on Soul.
Right. Yeah. Well, I edited Soul Book for many years, and I'm actually 81. You're 71. I'm 81.
You make me feel youthful.
Well, I'm sitting here listening to your story, and I don't know why. I mean, there's so many things that we could talk about. In fact, you can listen to me on the Carl Nelson show on Tuesday if you know. And I'll be talking about the question of black feminism and its impact on the change from the Black Power movement to the Black Lives Matter movement in terms of what happened. And so I'm glad you recognized me. I wasn't sure that you did, but as you went through your history, it was in much the way it was the same. Coming out of Oakland especially, and I'm not on the podium, so I'm not going to talk forever on the thing, but maybe we can get together and talk a little bit after.
I'd love to.
Oh, okay. All right, that's all I have to say.
All right. Oh, all right. Thank you.
Peace, sister. How you doing?
All right. Thank you so very much, Baba. Dr. Makungu.
Is that Nkechi back there?
Yes, it is.
Hey, attorney
Let me
Nkechi.
tell
Yeah.
you, This is just so beautiful. Just a couple of weeks ago, Brother Akinyela Umoja and Gloria House and the like were here on September 17th. Mama C is going to be here from Tanzania. You know, we're talking about the New African Independence Movement and issues of political prisoners and exiles, of which Brother Jomo, you touched on. So really the question I have for you, and I just want to say thank you for continuing the teachings and philosophies of Franz Fanon, because what he did in the field of psychiatry. I don't know if you're a psychiatrist, psychologist, or whatever, but yeah, I kind of look at it in that same type of mode. So asante sana for that. But can you speak just a little bit in terms of political prisoners and our exiles and many of our political prisoners from the COINTELPRO era, I guess you could say, the majority of them, even as very elders and on their near deathbeds have been released. There are some who still are there. But is there some type of way you can say just psychologically or, just the whole impact of our people, of our soldiers being locked up and incarcerated for just such lengthy periods of time and the impact that had or has on those of us who are on the outside. So I'm not really articulating that quite well, but if you can kind of weave something together in terms of those those issues, I'd appreciate it.
Peace. Appreciating what you said, Sister Nkechi. It's good to hear you. The last chapter of the book, I take out from an interview that I did with Assata Shakur some years ago. And I'm working, I was telling Jomo, I'm working on taking that interview and writing up more of it. I did an interview with her and also with Nahanda Abiodun, talking about, again, their spiritual experience and how it helped them to survive some of the conditions that they went through. But as I think about it, from those, I had several conversations with Assata, with Nahanda in exile, and the question of home was always at the center for them. So even though they were in exile, not in prison, they weren't home, right? They weren't with their people. That's torture, right? Nahanda, unfortunately, was never able to make it home. She passed away in exile, right? Not able to see her grandchildren and her children except under some of the most harsh conditions. Assata, to the point that, because of, every few years the government would up the bounty on her, was driven deeper and deeper underground, right? Now, we romanticize that shit, but that's alienating. That's isolating, right? To have to live like that. If you're young, that might seem like cool and romantic, but to be away from your folk, to be away from your people, right? That's a deadly thing. Mutulu, I met Mutulu the first time before he went to prison. I was given the assignment of taking somebody somewhere. I wasn't told who it was. And Mutulu moved like that, right? I was supposed to wait on a corner, and this brother showed up at the corner, and he introduced himself, right? And that's how I met Mutulu, right? But he was a brother who was vibrant. Mutulu is the one who united the New African Independence Movement. He united us with the Asian Liberation Movement, right? He showed us what it meant to be a revolutionary nationalist and an internationalist, right? He was sold out to the people, right? Mutulu spent how many years? 30 years locked away in prison, right? And he basically was given the death sentence that these pigs are giving all of our prisoners right now. They let you get sick, and then they let you stay there and rot there until they know you ain't got but a minute left. And then they let you out. That is cruel, unusual, and sadistic punishment that the colonizers don't mind Why? Fanon tells us because they don't recognize us as human, because they have pushed us into the zone of non-being. How can they treat us like this? Because we are not human to them, right? And once we realize that we are not human to them, we realize that the only thing we can do is fight, because they ain't gonna never be nice to us. Not in the context of colonialism and capitalism. That is the contradiction that's got them freaked out right now. And so it is important that we think about our exiles, that we think about our political prisoners, our prisoners of war, and understand that to fight for them is a part of fighting for our own freedom. I hope that's what you were thinking about in Kechi as I was talking.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you. And also Pete O'Neill, who's in exile in Tanzania, his wife is going to be here in Sankofa on September 13th. And so answering now.
One, I want to thank you for coming and for your critical presentation. And I think the issue of Nilotic feudalism, let's call it for a second, that you pointed out, actually is why colonialism succeeded, is why slavery succeeded, is why neocolonialism is now succeeding here or there now. The elite is the entry door of oppression to African people. And I think a clear class analysis is very important. So I think we're in the same page on that. But the problem I have with you is that you seem to be merciful to organized religion. To me, spiritualism I thought I lost my thought process here. I was being advised. Excuse me. So for me, I think the pacifying agency of organized religion, not only in contemporary times, but in traditional times, because Africans were first captured. The first shackle for me is religion. The Catholic Church, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the first shackle of slavery is religion. It's the pacification of the resistance aspect of African people. To this day, it has the biggest population of our people. It's the most obscene, rich class that actually is not taken to task. I love Jeremiah Wright, but I would not convert to his religion. But I know he's revolutionary within that, within the preachers. I'm not going to lump him with the rest, and I can see how hard he works to revolutionize those people who he has come in contact, wherever he lectured, outside his church, Howard, all the way to California. I know he's a very important person. But for me, I think spiritualism cannot be mixed with religion. Organized religion, for me, has to be tele-targeted as a major oppressive instrument, the custodian of our people. You take Zimbabwe, you take South Africa, you take the whole Brazil, Shango, the Shango organization in Brazil, in Bahia, is fighting black people who are come from organized religion, condemning it a primitive religion. So to me, there's this unrelenting contradiction the African people had between their spiritual essentiality and the organized religion. To me, I'm Catholic by family, but to me, I know how much the Vatican, how much it played in slavery, how much it blessed the ships and the slave buyers, blessing them, saying, consider you going to war for your country, etc. So to me, I cannot digest. I do not put down people for being religious. They're not my immediate struggle, but I also know black people have to be retrieved out of that control. Otherwise, we're talking about cultural revolution. For me, part of it is really a lot of our people, in Zimbabwe, all the film theaters in Africa in general are now taken by Texas proselytizers. Africans participating, African elite participating, the government's participating. And so for me, I think a clear distinction has to take place. Otherwise, for me, culture is not just the song, etc. The fact we are colonized by organized religion is a serious matter. That's where I'm not very clear about your take, because to me, the dialectical historical materialism is not only first matter, between this respond idea, and it's not only a battle between idea and matter, but I think it has a lot to do with what you said about Gramsci. When he talks about the people, the example you gave, the conditioned African going back to the door that doesn't exist will create the door. That analysis applies strongly to those of our people that are actually under organized religion. I hope I made my point rather than in Kichi.
Brother Haile, appreciating what you say, if I understand you correctly, the truth is actually we probably are still pretty much on the same page. I would agree with you. Organized religion, and I'm assuming when you think about that, you're thinking particularly of the organized churches, whether it's Catholic or Protestant or whatever. I was going to go there. I would agree with you, right? That it's a part of the problem. For me, it's also, though, a field of organizing. It's where the masses are. It's where our people are. And so I will show up there. I happen, my wife says I'm not religious, which is probably true, right? But, I personally adhere to the teachings of the gospel, which I see as revolutionary and anti-imperialist, not to the organized structure that's been built up out of the Roman Empire that's come across over time, right? Which have enslaved and colonized the scriptures. Right, so I'm not tied to the organized structure of what we call organized religion. Right, some of when the Roman Empire first began to attack Christians, their main charge against them that they were atheist. Right, I like that thought. Right, I'm a religious atheist. Right, so I agree with you, and I think a part of the process over time will be deconstructing and eliminating those institutions that have been a part of oppressing our people as well, right? And so I don't disagree with you on that. And hopefully, if we can at some time even talk more about that, I think we can hold two thoughts at once. I can believe in the teachings of Jesus, and I can say that this institution that's been organized in His name is bullshit. Right, so.
Hello. I really appreciated what you've added on spirituality, but also especially what you said about Nahanda and Asada and that concept of home and the grief. And I feel like right now, especially since the pandemic, a lot of us have lost a lot of people in the past 5 years and constantly having to move through that grief. So what does it look like as a practice individually, but also collectively, to be making space for our grief while also finding the balance and not drowning in it, while consistently and constantly being our depressions, anxieties being exasperated by this fascist system?
I am. We went there. In the first two chapters, I forget which one it is in the book, And I, as I said, I'm learning how from my young colleagues how to promote myself. Like, did I tell y'all I got another book coming out in May? And if you're really interested in mental health, I've got a whole chapter on the relationship of mental health work to reparations, right? And in that, I talk about an approach to mental health work that I've developed called the 4 healing questions. I think that, first of all, to the question, M, that you asked, as I said, Western psychology, Western mental health work teaches us that we have to help people individuate and learn how to fit into the existing society. Okay? I believe that for the colonized, our struggle is not helping people individuate, but helping people find ways to live in healthy community, in healthy relationship, because it's in relationship that we find our best selves. Now, it has to be healthy relationship, right? Because colonialism also has us acting crazy in community, right? So, but our work is to help people do that. I believe as a testimony therapist, which is the form of narrative therapy that I've developed, that we do that through the stories that we tell about ourselves, being able to tell those stories. Again, in Black spiritual or church tradition, we talk about having a testimony. Y'all know what it means to have a testimony, right? The story that you want folk to tell about you. Your testimony is what helps you feel your personhood, right? And one of the practices that I talk about in terms of in the chapter in the book on reparations and mental health, I imagine mental health workers participating in the reparations work, right? By helping our nation, helping our people tell our story. You know how they trying to deny and destroy our story right now? Me and my wife going Monday to the History Museum before they close it down because we didn't get a chance to see it when it first opened, right? But being able to tell your story is what helps you conceptualize who you are and the meaning of your life. And so the 4 healing questions that I developed, and again, because culture is not static, this is something that I borrowed from First Nations Native American tradition called the 3 healing questions that was introduced by a First Nation woman named Pamina Yellowbird. Those 3 healing questions are, what happened to you? How does what happened to you affect you now? And what do you need to heal? Those are the 3 questions from Native American tradition, First Nations tradition. What I did is I added a 4th question to interject between the second and the third, or the third. What happened to you? What's your story? Something happened to you. How does what happened to you affect your life today? What's going on in real time for you right now? Despite what happened to you and how it's affecting you now, what's given you the strength to carry on? That's the interjection. Because you're still here. And finally, despite what happened to you and looking at how it affects you today, but seeing how you've been able to hold on despite all of that, what do you need to heal right now? What will make it better in your life? Imagine if we had workers amongst our nation going out to the communities and getting the community to tell the community story. What happened to this community? Well, everything was fine until they put that freeway through our community and split relationships up. Right? And people couldn't see each other or get to each other. It tore down our institutions. It tore down those things we need. Everything was fine until they took that hospital out that we could get to if we were sick. Right? Everything was fine until they shut down all the factories, and the people who had jobs and work and money had nothing. Right? Everything was fine until then. Well, how is that affecting your life today? And if you could lead a community in discussing that and documenting the impact of oppression over time, despite what happened to you and how it's affecting you, How have you been able to carry on? It's important that our people recognize that we resist. A part of our culture is resistance and resilience, and we need to be able to document that resistance and resilience. What if you had those workers organizing all over our nation, documenting our people's ways of resistance? And then finally, what do you need to heal, right? Reparations is not just about money, right? But also, the people don't need outsiders or even us highfalutin intellectuals and so-called revolutionaries imposing their solutions on them. We need to ask the people what the people want, what the people need. And what if we had people all over the country documenting the solutions that the people themselves have for the problems that have been pushed on the people, and we begin to document those problems. And then we begin all over the country to take all that evidence, all that documentation, all of that knowledge about healing and begin to network it, right? Begin to say, this is what the people in Mississippi say. This is what the people in California say. This is what the people in D.C. say. And we begin to take all that information, and then out of the movement of reparations, we say, this is what the masses say that reparations needs to look like. And this is the demand that we are moving on and that we are standing on. And at the same time, by having those healing circles, we've been creating a process of self-healing amongst the masses for the trauma that we have faced. Reparations is also not just about slavery. See, white folks get us stuck in that, right? As if they stopped oppressing us after slavery, right? Reparations is about the colonial exploitation and oppression of our nation for the entire 300-400 years that we've been here, up to including slavery, but beyond, up to and including the election of Donald Trump, right? And the expression of open fascism on our people, right? We are owed for every cent of that. And it's not just all about cash. Reparations can come in many forms, but we have to go to the people to find out what the people say reparations should look like. Does that make sense? And I hope, M, that is a response to your questions as well.
Hello, how are you? Peace, brother. All right. You're a person that definitely can definitely heal the youth, and so I just listened to you. So definitely we definitely need that. And also I would like to say that when it comes to organization and things like that, for example, we don't need white people, white approval, or white anything. I look at it like this. I look at it like we have to, do for self, and that when you really look at it, because this is well documented, when it comes to the youth, when it comes to when the youth find out that the elders are taking money from white people, the youth do not have respect for the elders when they do that. I love my elders to death, but when you study the truth, they're taking money behind some cracker somewhere, and now it just messes it up, and it's a hybrid of everything. And so that's just really what it is. And so that's what I have to say, and I'm done talking.
Appreciate you, brother.
Thank you. When you talk about the kind of therapy that you're providing, I'm interested in knowing in how prevalent it is. Are there other institutions, HBCUs, cultural groups that are promoting it, and what really needs to happen for it to be more prevalent? You kind of remind me of Dr. Frances Welsing when she talks about people's illness and how most of that from society as opposed to from within the individual. Thank you.
Appreciate, brother, what you're asking. The work I do is called testimony therapy. it's an approach to mental health that I began developing about 25 years ago. I've written about it, book chapters, journal articles. I'm in private practice for about the last 35 years. And it's related to a wider approach to storytelling therapy called narrative therapy, which was developed by a man named Michael White and also David Epstein. Michael White is from Australia. David Epstein is from New Zealand. Two white guys who took a radical approach to mental health in the 70s or so. You know, that zeitgeist thing. I had been, I finished my PhD in 1996. Yes. And I had been writing then. The work that my dissertation, my research was around critical pedagogy and helping people tell stories and things like that. And I got invited to Australia because I met some narrative therapists who did some very similar things to what I was doing. That zeitgeist, it's like I had never heard of these people, but this seems similar. And we had some great conversations. While I was there, I also met the indigenous people, the Aboriginal people, who actually a lot of the ideas of narrative therapy were borrowed from Aboriginal culture and also Maori culture in New Zealand. And so, in fact, I did a keynote a few months ago at the first Indigenous Narrative Therapy Conference in Australia back in March. So I tell people that testimony therapy is a narrative therapy, but it's an African-centered narrative therapy, right? I've taught, students, I've lectured, so there are people who talk about testimony therapy, in other areas. It's not widespread as testimony therapy, but narrative therapy itself, and I think I've had a big influence on it at this time, is pretty widely practiced, particularly in Africa. It's been used in Rwanda after the genocide. It's used in South Africa, working with people living with HIV. It's been practiced. I spent about 2 weeks in Palestine working with therapists in the West Bank, right? Working with people who'd undergone torture and such. So these ideas are being shared right now, right? And I'm hoping, once again, after that book come out in May, it's going to be even more spread because it's a big publisher. And so, yeah, but I hope that answers it. I consider myself a part of the larger narrative therapy community. I just give a special critique because narrative therapy, the metaphor that guides it is textuality, literacy. They talk about literature, a text, the narrative. And the question I ask is, what if you come from a culture where literacy is not the primary cultural form of your storytelling? For black people, testifying ain't literary. It's oral, right? We talk it. It's musical. And so that's the critique that I bring to narrative therapy, not saying that there's a problem with narrative therapy, but saying that all knowledge is socially constructed but culturally mediated. We have to always understand the cultural context of whatever we do. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm.
That's it. No more questions. We landed that one right on time. All right. Look at God.
Won't he do it?
Yes, indeed. All right. Well, we've completed our talk. I just want to, for folks who are in DC or staying around, want to invite folks.